Probably a huge thing that stands out too is that I have felt like, as try to be as quick as possible in seeing this, but I try to follow the trend of the church, and I've always felt like church was a sacred event. It sounds like at some point 40 years ago, 50 years ago, where it's like everyone went to church because it was what you were supposed to do. Even got dressed up to church. That's almost
Mhm,
comical now to think about dressing up like you were going to a wedding, but you were going to church for the
mhm,
next generation at least. But eventually, it didn't wasn't a sacred event anymore, and people started leaving, and there was the seeker sensitive movement, which does get a lot of flack, but there was a lot of the reason and the impetus of doing that was there are so many people hurt by the church or lost that guys like Bill Hybels, like Rick Warren, Andy Stanley, I think Ed Young Jr. There started being even Life Church, maybe a little bit, like started making these churches that was designed for those that were hurt by the church or just very de-churched or unchurched or felt like church was irrelevant, and they did start winning over a lot of people that just didn't want to go anymore.
mhm,
But the shadow, because I think every generation swings the pendulum somewhere, and then there's a shadow. I think the shadow, of course, as we know, is sometimes that can be a little too comfortable. Sometimes it feels like, oh, we're just safe. I'm not getting challenged. I'm just getting helped in myself, like self help. It can sometimes feel more motivational and not actually like the conviction to a repentance. Sometimes it can be just so slick, and there's a lot of fog, and there's a lot of like it's so produce that you're almost losing like that sacredness that the generation before came to. And then I point to like, well, what was the next move? And I just feel like Xers, and I think of Matt Chandler, I think of Mark Driscoll. Like for our generation, all of us are like,
mhm.
except for Luke, are like in their late 20s, early 30s, or maybe like mid 30s. But man, when Mark Driscoll and Matt Chandler, David Platt, Francis Chan, those guys were like new, fresh voices
Mhm,
that they weren't seeker sensitive. I
yeah.
always think like they were like Matt Chandler and Mark Driscoll were like literally shouting at young guys to like
Yeah.
put your pants on, like, and
Yeah,
some of them were cussing, some of them were
yeah,
cussing at us even,
that's
and
true.
then I say if they weren't cussing or shouting, guys like Francis Chan and David Platt, who I love, but they were kind of crying and they were
Yeah,
emotional and it
yeah.
was raw. It didn't make you feel almost. I mean, Francis Chan makes you feel like you're not a Christian every time he talks. You just
Yeah.
feel like I don't love God like that guy. I feel like I'm supposed to, and maybe I'm not really a Christian.
Yeah.
And so, but the next generation, man, we loved that, and so it went from like a sacred event to I would say an awesome event. We're trying to make it cool and relevant to, or just like comfortable, and our kids are safe here. To like this authentic event, this gathering. And I guess my last point is I think for us as the next millennials, especially maybe try to make it a little bit of sacred, a little bit of awesome, a little bit authentic, but especially like a cause, like a movement,
Mhm.
something to go change the world. But I would also say the shadow for us is that we try to make it cool.
Yeah.
We tried to make being a Christian cool. We
Mhm.
loved the Carl Lentzes of the world. And today we love like the Chad Beach. We love when Justin Bieber is a Christian and doing Christian stuff. We love when Kanye West is making Christian stuff. Like we love when Christianity can be cool. But I think the shadow is we know you can only be so cool and say die to yourself. You can only there's some things that just aren't cool. Like even as a Christian, I'm like, man, God, we got to talk about this on the other side. Like I wrestle with this part,
Mhm.
and I guess I'd say, yeah, you can't be like the world and win over the world. And what I love about Gen Z, a long way to say, I'm seeing it's almost like because they're seeing so many of their friends and there's just no resort but to be a missionary and to be on fire for Christ. It's just no a lot less casual Christianity that I think of Charles Spurgeon quote, you're either a missionary or you're an imposter.
Mhm.
And I think that's more of the for next gen, more and more, even now for millennials, where it's like you're either in and you're all in, or you're out. Like there's no reason to be in the middle. And even I think the enemy's losing, at least in this, that we may have less Christians than before, but the next generation that are Christian, I think there's a lot more of them that are just all in. And I really appreciate their fervor and that the desire to not just be cool enough, but like to just preach the gospel, to rely on the Spirit of God to move. And a real biggest thing I see is this desire for revival.